This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. A little over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way. And I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and this is episode number 290 of the podcast. You know, we're just 10 away from 300 episodes, which just blows my mind. But anyway, glad you're with us. Glad you're with me on this journey. If this is your first time listening into this podcast, welcome. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're back and hope you've taken time to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. So, and speaking of podcasts, my guest today is another fellow podcaster, Patrick Casale. And Patrick is a therapist in Asheville, North Carolina. And, you know, it's interesting because Patrick and I have been kind of parallel to each other in more ways than one, just with our podcasts, but just also just our interaction. Geographically, we don't live that far apart, but yet we don't seem to get together. We met a couple of years ago in Asheville, but, you know, for whatever reason, we haven't had that much interaction, but nothing awry with that, but just one of those things. But anyway, I'm looking forward to you hearing from Patrick and our conversation. Patrick was really vulnerable in this episode and just talking about, we talk about creativity and entrepreneurship and what it's been like for him as a neurodivergent person to do this kind of work and be an entrepreneur and that sort of thing. Patrick talks about being diagnosed with autism and also some ADHD and what that's been like for him and what he's learning about himself and what he's learned about others and just being a therapist and all of that. So it's a great conversation, and I'm really thrilled for you to get to hear from Patrick Casale. If you haven't heard him already, he has two podcasts, All Things Private Practice, which is it's been out there a while, and it is a great podcast. He's got several episodes there. And then the other podcast, which is more recent for him, is called Divergent Conversations. And it's done with co-host Dr. Megan Neff. And I'm looking forward to hearing that podcast. I've not gotten to listen to any of those episodes yet, but I'm looking forward to hearing that. And they just talk about what it's been like for them as neurodivergent therapists. And so going to be some interesting stuff. So going to get to my conversation with Patrick here in just a moment. One of the things I'd like to invite you to do, though, is if you are a smaller group practice and you're also insurance-based, I'd love for you to become part of this next cohort of the group practice focus group. And we are a group of therapists that get together twice a month, and we talk about all the ins and outs and ups and downs of running small group practices that are also insurance-based. We just finished up our first cohort, had a great group of people in that. One or two of those folks are going to continue on, but looking for some other people to join that this next cohort and this next group. So you can find out more about that and apply to be part of this next focus group by just simply going to practiceoftherapy.com/focus group, and you can find out more about that and apply. And also, feel free to drop me an email if you want to have a conversation about if this particular group would be a good fit for you. But we've got just a few more seats left in this particular group. I limit the size of it just because I want us to be able to have some good conversations and be able to really give each other time and just some little bit of business intimacy, if that's a term. If not, I just made it up. So, but anyway, be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/focus group. And also, if, this particular episode, Patrick and I talk about podcasting a little bit, but if you have ever thought about starting your own podcast or are interested in that and what it would take, I'd invite you to go over to practiceoftherapy.com/podcasting workshop. And that is a free resource for me that just goes through with you all the steps you need to know about in starting a podcast. It's an email series, so you're going to get the lessons and the information in small bites. So hopefully it's easy to digest and not take up a whole lot of your time. But you can go over to practiceoftherapy.com/podcast workshop or podcasting workshop. Either one of those should work for you. But anyway, go be sure and check it out. And also real quickly here, before we get to my conversation with Patrick, love for you to hear from one of the other members of the PsychCraft Network, along with from our sponsor, TherapyNotes.
Hey there, Daniel Fava here, and if you don't know me, I'm the host of the Private Practice Elevation podcast, where I share online marketing strategies and interviews to help private practice owners attract more clients and scale their businesses. The Private Practice Elevation podcast is part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts, and I'm super excited to be a part of this network alongside Gordon and the great work he's doing. If you haven't discovered the Private Practice Elevation podcast yet, you can find it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love for you to join me as we explore topics like building an effective website for your private practice, search engine optimization, content marketing, and copywriting, as well as my conversations with experienced private practice owners about scaling a practice, outsourcing, team leadership, and all things that will help you elevate your business and create the life you love. Be sure to check us out at privatepracticeelevation.com for resources and content to help you in your online marketing journey.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so thrilled to have Patrick Casale with me today. Hey, Patrick.
My name right.
Yes. Yes. Oh, good. That's good. So Patrick and I we met, I guess we first met a couple of years ago in Asheville, and we got some of us in this whole private practice consulting people space together. And Patrick and I don't know why we haven't been on each other's podcasts before now.
I don't know either. And I think some of that is just life circumstances and getting in the way. And I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So it's
absolutely. And so for those folks that might not know who you are, although I can't imagine that, tell folks about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Ooh, it's a complex question. So I'm
Yeah.
from upstate New York originally. I moved down to Asheville in 2011. Most of you who know me, if you do know me or follow my stuff or my story, you know that I was running from a gambling addiction that had consumed most of my life, and ultimately thought I could live here for a year, change things, and move back to New York. Thankfully, have not gambled since June of 2012, and
Mhm.
life has changed pretty significantly since that time. Um, I graduated with my master's in 2015, went into community mental health as most of us do, thought that was the finish line and the end point, and that was the goal. Got burnt out quickly, just wasn't built for that environment as a neurodivergent human being, the expectations, the hours, etc. Started my private practice in 2017. Again, thought that was the end goal and finish line. Maybe it's just my ADHD that comes out in creative ways and gets bored easily. But I
Mhm.
then decided I wanted to start helping therapists start and grow their businesses. And since that time in 2020, when COVID happened, things have kind of exploded for me over the last 2.5, 3 years. It's kind of crazy to think that my business is not even 3 years old yet, but it's turned into coaching. It's turned into a podcast. It's turned into hosting international retreats all over the world, speaking at conferences. I just don't think I ever envisioned being in this position.
Yes, yes, and Patrick's got some great stuff, and we're gonna hopefully hit on a lot of that stuff today. But Patrick, I know one of the things that we were chatting about before we started recording is just kind of for both of us, just kind of some parallel journeys with just life struggles, and how do you navigate all of that in the midst of running a business, running a practice, running other entrepreneurial things. And so, yeah, what are your thoughts on all that?
My thoughts are complex.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I've had, for those of you who don't know, I've had 2 major throat surgeries in the last 2 years. I've got diagnosed with a chronic throat illness and condition that um, impacts 0.001% of the population, and mostly people over 65. So I'm the lucky 35-year-old who got diagnosed with this
Mm,
condition and had major throat surgery in October of this year. One of my vocal cords was damaged in the surgery, and I still don't have full vocal capacity or range yet. It is healing, thankfully, but it is a slow process. We're about 8 months in now. And that was probably the scariest thing for me going into the surgery. It wasn't the fact that I was having another surgery. It wasn't knowing that it was going to be challenging. I just was very fearful that I was going to lose my voice. And
mhm,
as a podcaster and coach and someone who has to speak in order to make money and run my business, that was horrifying. And of course, that's what ended up happening.
mhm,
And my energy levels too have not fully come back. And I just don't think I expected it to take so long for me to be able to regain and recharge and be able to be at like my 100% self, because usually when I'm 100%, I'm very creative. I'm doing a lot of things. I'm moving a lot, and I have the capacity to create a lot. And I've noticed that I've really had to readjust to whatever this new normal is for me,
mhm.
and I have to schedule significantly less in my day to day. I can only really handle 2 meetings, 2 podcasts, 2 sessions a day with anything I'm doing. And then I have to rest. And it's just been very challenging. I think that the behind the scenes of having to run multiple businesses when you're dealing with something chronic, or when you're dealing with something that's really taking away your focus and your energy, it
Mhm.
impacts your business and
Yeah,
it impacts how you show up.
yeah, yeah. I would totally agree. And as I've shared with folks, and this was kind of how we kind of decided on this course of conversation, we just in my but all of us have lives outside of our businesses and what we do. And um my wife is now terminally ill, and we've started hospice care for her. But just the whole the whole journey from when she was first diagnosed with breast cancer in 2010, and being able to do the things that I love doing and loving to engage with people on on this platform, and just in the work that we both do as consultants and stuff. There's a sense of guilt that I experience of not being able to show up in those places as well as I would like to. And just
Absolutely.
feeling like there's a lot of things that I leave hanging, and just being the consummate people pleaser that I am, feeling like I'm letting people down and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard, and my heart goes out to both of you, and I
Hmm.
can't imagine that it's easy to show up and just know that at the same time, simultaneously, this is what's happening behind the scenes. I
Hmm.
think that's why I'm so open and honest about my own experiences on in my social media, my podcast, because I want people to know that they're not alone in this journey. Because I think so
Hmm.
often there's this almost facade of entrepreneurship where it's like shiny object, feet out on the beach, everything is glorious. I can work from anywhere. In
Hmm.
reality, there's a lot going on that is behind the scenes that is impactful. And for me, losing my voice, I still was seeing therapy clients up until my surgery. I only had about 4 left on my caseload. I had been
Hmm.
transitioning out of this for quite some time. And I let them know prior to surgery, I don't know if I'm when I will be back. And when I lost my voice and my vocal cords were damaged, I had to reach out to them and say, I'm actually not coming back. And there was a lot
Hmm.
of grief around that, and feelings
Yeah.
of shame and abandonment. And it was very hard to commit to that decision. And I've also had to shift my business model because I was doing a lot of group coaching programs and individual coaching, and I have not taken a coaching client since before October. Yet I get bombarded by people who are emailing and DMing like, "Can I work with you? Can I work with you?" And I have to say,
Hmm.
"No, I don't have the capacity." And not only is that scary financially, um, it just brings up that feeling of, am I losing myself in this business? Like, am I losing a
Yeah.
part of myself?
Right. Right. Yeah. It's that whole balance of, I think, again, I suffer from a little bit of that shiny object syndrome too. And so the next thing that comes along, you want to jump on it and do that. But it's being able to set those limits and set boundaries for yourself around all of this stuff. So yeah, being able to find that balance. We throw around the term life balance, but I think in running multiple businesses, as we both do, it takes on a whole different shape when you're facing, just other things within your life.
Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
there are seasons to being an entrepreneur. I think that for me, right now, I feel like I'm kind of in the winter of my career, but I feel also like as I regain strength and energy, that things are starting to grow, things are starting to percolate, and it allows you to kind of take a step back and be really intentional about what you say yes to. And I think that's important when your energy has shifted or when your focus has shifted, because for people pleasers that are a lot of helpers in general, it's
Hmm.
very easy to want to say yes to everything
Yeah.
because it's like, I don't want to let someone down. I don't want to say no. I don't want to reject this offer. But
Mm-hmm.
when you don't have the same capacity or ability or energy or focus, you have to be able to set these limitations for yourself and work within that scope, because otherwise burnout is not an option for me anymore. Like, burning myself out does my audience no good. It does me no good. And I think
Hmm.
also, we were talking about this before we started recording, having good teammates in your businesses, having good people you can rely on. Like, I have such a good infrastructure in my group practice between clinical directors and office managers and admin support teams that it really never missed a beat, even while I was out dealing with my own recovery. And that for me is just a reflection of just creating good culture and also relying on the people that you need to rely on when things get challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, just kind of the giving ourselves permission to allow people to see our own vulnerabilities is huge. I know, same thing for me. I've got a wonderful team in my practice where, I've been, open book with them saying, I'm not going to be showing up like I usually do. And them being able to come back and reassure me, we've got this, kind of thing. And so take a lot of pride in that, and that I've hired the right people and, got a good group of people that are behind all of this.
Yeah, makes a huge difference to be able to rely on and lean on them. It's challenging. I think, I don't know about you, but it was challenging on me to accept that for myself and to
Mm-hmm.
say I'm going to have to rely on my teammates more than I usually would. But vulnerability is strength too. I think that being open and honest and vulnerable with the people around you and your audience and your staff goes a long way. It shows
Right.
that you're human, right? And it shows that there's this process where we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes a major, major difference.
Sure. So, well, Patrick, to change gears a little bit, one of the things I'm really interested in is, Patrick, I will say this, Patrick's one of our newest members to the Sightcraft Network, and I'm real excited to have him in this journey with me. You've got a newer podcast, and so tell folks about that and just kind of how that evolved.
Yeah, thank you. So we have two podcasts, the All Things Private Practice podcast, which is, about the psychological and emotional side of business ownership. And then I have recently released the Divergent Conversations podcast, which I co-host with Dr. Megan Neff. We are both autistic ADHD mental health professionals. And
Mm-hmm.
Megan was on my podcast a couple of times throughout the last 2 years, and we've really kind of grown to be connected and have good conversation. And I approached her one day and said, hey, would you have any interest in co-hosting this podcast if we were able to talk about adult ADHD autism experience, diagnosis, stories, sharing our own experiences with the world, but also processing it from a clinical lens as we're talking and sharing, so that people know clinically how to support their own neurodivergent kids or teens or adults or practices in general. And she was like, you know what? I was going to message you the same thing. So we ended up deciding, like, we really want this to be very intentional. We know that when you're talking to a marginalized group, you have to be really intentional with your language, with how you speak about certain topics. We wanted it to be very sensitive. We wanted it to be very vulnerable, and we wanted it to be very real. So today we released episode 10, and I want to say that we already have had 25,000 plus downloads in 10 weeks.
Wow.
So it feels a bit overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's so important, because we have, even as mental health professionals, we are still lacking quite a bit of knowledge to be neurodivergent affirmative in our practices, and we're still using outdated language, and there's still a lot of shame and stigma around the word autism in general in our society. So
Mm-hmm.
Megan and I are really trying hard to advocate on a major level for people who just don't have the ability to do so.
Right. So, yeah, so this is a big, broad question. What are some of your top take home points or tips around all of that for those of us in the, that are working in the mental health fields, but just also in just being able to communicate and be with folks that are neurodivergent in a better, more compassionate way?
I think curiosity is so important. And I think continued learning, right? Like, we know this as mental health professionals, but I think continued learning around these subjects are important, because what we hear so often, Megan and I both, is from people who have reached out to therapists who have said, hey, I'd like to come see you. I'm autistic. And then the therapist will say, I'm not competent in that area. I'm not competent in supporting autistic adults. And that person gets turned away. And I think the realization is, like, we have this perception of autism as a society that it looks a certain way. And I think that's just founded in ableism. But ultimately, when I tell people I'm autistic, the response is typically, how so? You're too intelligent. You're too high functioning. You own multiple businesses. And it's like, we're talking neurodevelopmental conditions here. So I think the big takeaways really are like, how can we support autistic and ADHD people? Because we're starting to understand that the amount of neurodiverse people in our society are much larger than we anticipate them to be. How can we set up practices where we are affirmative? And how can we support people in a clinical sense where we're honoring identity? So it becomes the clinician has to do the work is really what it breaks down to. And whether that means listening to podcasts, going to trainings, doing continued education from autistic ADHD trainers, really important. So I think we have a long way to go, but I do think we have this neurodivergent movement right now that's happening where people are really openly coming out as autistic ADHD. And I got late diagnosed in life. I'm 36 right now. I got diagnosed at 35. And it's been life-changing. I mean, it's been really, really transformative in so many ways. But I do think, and as I've talked about on that podcast, there's a grief relief process of getting a diagnosis that is lifelong, that is debilitating. So, and that goes to like having family members reach out and be like, that's not true. That's not how I experienced you as a kid. And that, is obviously quite minimizing and dismissive, but nevertheless, I think being able to talk about it openly, being able to share with our communities about our own struggles, yet showing up and saying, this is how we navigate the world. This is how you can do the same things, can be really, really empowering.
Yeah, it's something that I've been kind of delving in more and more here recently is, one of my wife's caregivers, we were having that conversation and she was recognizing that she's got, some neurodivergence herself. And, I think there's, at least from what I hear from her, and you can chime in on this, Patrick, but, there is a lot of shame associated with it, and that there's, she's kind of heard most of her life, what's wrong with you, or, all these messages, or why can't you get it together, and all of those kinds of things. And just really, I think it's been liberating for her to recognize that she's got some tendencies of ADHD, and probably could probably, we haven't tested her, but could probably test out, full-blown ADHD kind of thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of shame in these diagnoses. And we have to, if we're looking at it from the disability model, autism is quite disabling for many, many people, and ADHD as well in terms of executive functioning. So I think about this, like, the more affirmative we can be, the more advocacy spaces that can be created, the more people who can be outward, like talking about these things, who can showcase like, okay, I am a mental health therapist, I'm a business owner, yet I struggle with these things. And here are the ways that you can navigate the world and make it easier to talk about. Really, really important. But I do think that the importance of, masking and unmasking, being able to actually drop into who you are at home when it's safe to do so, really important. I think the struggle area is like a lot of neurodivergent people who work 9-to-5 jobs have a really hard time because of sensory overload, because of executive functioning challenges, because of social communication challenges, because 9-to-5s are really not great spaces for neurodivergent folks whose brains and systems process differently. I would joke that I'm no longer employable after leaving my job in 2017, but I think I'm also privileged enough to like own my own company, so I get to set my own hours, and I know that not everyone has the ability to do that.
Yeah. So what are some things that you've learned for yourself? I mean, that you would be okay to share, of just how you've navigated all of this, because you are a successful practice owner. You've done well, and so what do you attribute to your success with all this?
Lots and lots of self-discovery, introspection, and therapy. Just learning about yourself, like, and again, I have the ability to talk about this stuff pretty openly without much repercussion. Not everyone can do that. So I think that what I've learned is giving myself permission to be myself. As you notice in this podcast, I'm not making a ton of eye contact, and I don't make a ton of eye contact in general. And I think in the past, before learning about my autism diagnosis, you're so often trying to force yourself into this box where it doesn't feel comfortable or where you don't feel like you belong. And socially, that happens a lot when it comes to like making eye contact, nodding your head when people are talking, so you're affirming what they're saying, like um, smiling when people make a joke. Like you're doing all of these things, but they don't come naturally. So it takes a lot of effort and energy that goes unrecognized. And then when you get home, you're like, why am I so damn exhausted? Like, what's happening to me?
Yes.
And
Yes.
the way I experience autism and the reason I sought out testing was because I never felt like I truly landed or belonged or fit in. And I never felt like I fully arrived as a human, which seems to be a very typical autistic experience. So that is what really created the urgency to figure out what was happening. Now, this is why I think Megan and my podcast is so good, because we do have the vantage point of being clinical mental health specialists. So we see it from different angles. But I think what's happened is permission to unmask, permission to be socially awkward, permission to feel like I don't want to be around a lot of people a lot of the time because it's too overwhelming for me. So getting a good sense of your sensory overloads, what creates the energy drain, what reduces your capacity, and then being okay with communicating in your life about those things. So like my wife's family is big, and we're talking
Mhm.
like 60 people at cookouts and gatherings and holidays, and I am just too overwhelmed. So we've gotten to the point where we can easily communicate and say, I can commit to going to Christmas, I can commit to going here. I cannot commit to coming to every single event because for my system, it's just too much.
Right.
And so I think it's just about learning a lot of these compensation strategies.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can only imagine just being having, for I don't know if I'm neurotypical or not. I think a lot of times I think I've got a lot of ADHD symptoms, but what one of the things that occurs to me is how exhausting it must be to have to think about kind of social cues and just being able to read body language and all of that sort of thing that doesn't necessarily come just automatically.
It makes for good therapists, I'll tell you that, because you're tracking everything. But it
Yeah.
also it also just creates this unbelievable sense of exhaustion and mental fatigue. So,
Hmm.
but I think so many entrepreneurs and business owners, in my opinion, are probably neurodivergent because the ability to think outside the box, to think creatively, to pivot constantly, to have that flow of ideas, to have that hyper fixation when you're really in the zone. I think those things can feel really special when you're able to tap into them, and I think they can allow for people to really work differently and outside the box. There's
Hmm.
certainly a flip side to that, but um, I am very thankful for the way that my brain works in a lot of ways, even though it's a challenging existence in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love that. So to maybe change gears again here, Patrick, what was it that got you into podcasting and how'd you land on all that?
I'm gonna be really honest with you and your audience and everyone who's listening. I've never listened to a podcast in my entire life,
Oh,
um,
wow.
including my own. I don't listen to them. I've never have. I don't think I ever will, which is wild to
Yeah.
think like we have two successful podcasts. But um, I think that a lot of people, while I was creating this all things private practice journey and doing coaching and doing webinars and going on other people's podcasts, would keep saying, like, one, you have a really great podcast voice and tone, and two, you have a message and you should share it via podcasting. And I, like so many ventures in my life, like private practice, group practice, coaching, etc., had the idea and was like, I don't know how to implement it, so I'm not going to do it right now. And then one
Mhm.
day I was just like, I'm going to start this podcast. And I told my VA, and we found a hosting platform and just started recording. And
Uh-huh.
that's kind of my method to everything.
Uh-huh.
Kind of feels counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it just has to get to that point in my brain where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's grown. We just released episode 93 last week. And
Wow.
we have enough episodes in the queue and the pipeline for all things private practice to get us until March of 2024. So
Mhm.
I love having like authentic, real conversations like we're doing right now. None of it is
Mhm.
scripted. We just see where it goes. And I really have enjoyed having so many incredible people on, because at first I thought I'll just talk. It'll just be me. I realized I just wanted to have conversations with business owners and entrepreneurs about their own struggles and how they've worked through them and how they've gotten to the other side and all the cool creative things that they're doing. And what I wanted to do was amplify voices and like share stories with people to help normalize the fear, the failure, the imperfection, the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt that comes with trying anything new and doing anything creative. So it's been a hell of a journey, and I'm really excited to see where it continues to go.
Yes, yes. Well, yeah, your podcast is good, and you've got some really good guests and really tackle some really important issues. And what I love about your podcast is that there are no filters there, and that's a
Yep.
good that's a good thing. I mean, yeah. So yeah.
I don't know any other way to be. So when I go on other people's podcasts, I always have to ask, like, can I curse on this podcast? Can I
Yeah.
be myself? And I
Yeah.
try to censor myself to the best of my ability, but I think authenticity has become my brand. So it's really important
Uh-huh.
for me on our podcast to just be like, let's just show up how we are and let's just see where this goes. And for me, that's made for the best conversations. I can't say
Right.
for listening because I never have, and I don't think I ever will.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, what one other quick topic before we wrap things up? Tell us about the retreats and how you got those started, and what's behind all of that.
Gordon, I don't know if that's a quick topic. I
Uh,
actually just spoke about this at Ajetta Robinson Summit yesterday in Washington, D.C. Um, I'll try to be as succinct as possible. So
uh,
before COVID happened, I had the idea to start this business called Empowered Escape. I wanted to help helpers step away and immerse themselves in culture and put their phones down and actually have contact and connection. I think because as entrepreneurs, we're so often creating what we need. And I love
mhm,
traveling. And I love traveling like a local. I don't like doing the like typical travel stuff. So then COVID hit and I was like, well, that went out the window. I can't do that
mhm,
anymore. And then I pivoted and created all things private practice and helped people get out of their agency jobs, and the rest is history. But as COVID, I don't know how to phrase COVID anymore because I think it's
mhm.
just the rest of our lives. But as it was
Right.
lifting and getting more comfortable to travel and move through the world, I just put out on my Facebook one day, like, if I hosted a retreat in Ireland, would anyone come? And there were about 55 people, 60 people who were like, yeah, sign me up. Just tell me when and where. And I was like, oh, crap. Now I actually have to create this.
Right.
So I did create that in March of 2022 during St. Patrick's Day, took 15 therapists to Ireland, small village that nobody's ever heard of, including most Irish people.
Uh,
Um, and since that time, have done Asheville, Spain, Ireland again, Portugal this October, Asheville again in August, for next year, including an international summit where I rented an entire medieval Italian village,
Wow.
and everything sold out in less than a week. And what I
Oh,
realized is people want travel and connection and relationship and local experiences. I try really hard to always just use local small businesses, build those relationships so you can go back to that area again and again and again. Um, so I do Ireland as my flagship during St. Patrick's Day every March, because I
mhm,
think what's cooler than saying, like, let's go to Ireland during St. Patrick's Day to this old medieval village with a castle that was built in the 1200s that nobody has ever heard of, and take people out of their comfort zones, help them step away, help them immerse themselves in local experiences, work through their imposter syndrome, perfectionism, self-doubt as a group, because my events serve as like intimate incubators. I don't like big events, as you can imagine.
Hmm.
And it's been life-changing, not just for me, but for the people who come. The feedback is so phenomenal that I have guests who came to Ireland 2022 who have almost come to every single event that I have put out and continue to come back, because we are really focusing on the experience. We are really focusing on the evolution as human beings and the ability to be vulnerable. A lot of these
Hmm.
people have never left the country before. Some of these people are traveling on their own. And like, it's just amazing to witness what we can do in this field if we can step outside of the box and look at things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. I think I think about the times in my life when I've grown the most, and usually it's in the context of a retreat and being, away from my normal environment and doing things that, that are outside my comfort zone. I can, one in particular I'll share real quickly is just years ago, I went on a mission trip to Honduras, and you talk about outside your comfort zone. You've got the language barrier for me, and just going to a third world country that, felt scary and all of that sort of thing, and absolutely transformed my life. Yeah. At that point. Yeah.
I think that's what life is about, is experiencing. And
Yeah.
for me, there's no better way to do it than the way that we're doing it that way. And I've kind of coined the phrase doubt yourself, do it anyway. And that's kind of the motto for our retreats, because there's so much risk involved with traveling and just
Hmm.
discomfort that comes with traveling, but in a good way, where things don't always go as planned. Things can be messy, but then you get there, you kind of like drop in, the group forms, you start to see people smiling, you start to see their personalities coming out, you start to see friendships forming. It's
Hmm.
just really amazing. And I always am a wallflower because I don't like to be the center of attention. So I love like looking around and just seeing people like in pure joy, guard down, like truly being themselves and just embracing the moment. I think that's really been a wonderful thing for me and just for
Awesome.
the people who get to attend.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, Patrick, I've got to be respectful of our time and your time, and you've added a lot here and a lot that we talk about. And I'm looking forward to us connecting again here soon. Tell folks how they can reach you and find you and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Thank you so much, Gordon. I appreciate it. If you want to listen to the All Things Private Practice podcast, that's on all major platforms in YouTube. The Divergent Conversation podcast is on all major platforms in YouTube. You can go to my website, allthingspractice.com. You can join the Facebook group, All Things Private Practice. All of my social media is All Things Private Practice. And if you want to come on a retreat, the information is on the website as well.
Awesome. And we'll have links, of course, in the show notes and the show summary. And you're going to hear more from Patrick Casale. Well, again, a big thanks to Patrick for joining me on the podcast. He was just a fun guy to talk to, and I really admire him and the work that he's doing, and just being creative and also just being vulnerable in this particular episode, and just sharing about his life and what it's like to be neurodivergent, and how it's affecting him in his life, and also some of the gifts that it gives him. And that's been my experience along the way is that the gift that people that are on the autism spectrum bring us is the ability to see the world in a different way, and I really admire that and really appreciate that. So, but again, be sure and check out Patrick's things. His podcasts are All Things Private Practice, and the other one is Divergent Conversations, and you can find those wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, you'll find links here in the show notes for how to get in touch with Patrick and find out more about all that he's doing. So be sure and check that out. And also, real quickly before we go, I'd invite you to go over and check out the group practice focus group. And if you've got a smaller group practice and you're insurance based, I'd love to have you join this next cohort that's going to be starting this month. And so be sure and check it out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/focus group to apply and get started. So we're going to I'm looking forward to this next cohort. We've got a lot of great people so far, or a few great people so far, and we've got a few seats left. So I'd love for you to come join us if you think that'd be something that'd be interesting for you. And you can shoot me an email if you want to find out more about it, or if you just want to have maybe a quick phone call and we can chat and see if it's a good fit for you. So, and also, again, a big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice and just couldn't do without them. And if you'll be sure and use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, you can try them out for 2 months for free. Let's see if it's a good fit for you. It probably will be. I'm pretty much sure of that. But anyway, be sure and check it out. And so that's it for this episode. Be sure and follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. And we'll be back next week with another great guest of the Practice of Therapy podcast. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.